What is the deeper spiritual reality behind sexual sin? Whether that be lust, fornication, or adultery, is there really something more sinister happening behind the scenes that we don't see? If you struggle with sexual sin or perversion on any level, and you want freedom and the strength to resist temptation, I truly believe this mini-series is going to help you tremendously in your battle. We're going to expose sexual sin for what it really is. In this 4th episode, we're going to break down the story of Samson and Delilah, along with the golden calf story at Mount Sinai. By the end of this, you'll understand why we bring in the golden calf story. Let's jump into the scriptures. Let's take a look at the story of Samson first. Look at how his story unfolds. Starting in verse 1, Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. What you need to know about the law of God is God forbids Israel from intermarrying with the surrounding pagan nations. So for Samson to have an eye towards one of the Philistines and to take one of the Philistines in marriage is a direct violation of the law of God. So in this 4th episode, we're going to expose the spiritual reality behind the story of Delilah and Samson. And so if you haven't already picked up on this or watched the previous episodes, go watch those first 3 episodes, then come back here. But I hope I've made it clear, and I continue to make it supported with the scripture, that there is a deep connection between sexual immorality or perversion, along with occult practices and idolatry. So those are the main 3 components we're going to be looking for in each of these stories, see if they're present, because I'm convinced this is the thesis that sexual sin is very often a gateway into blatant idolatry, or can be a form of idolatry itself. And so look at how Samson's story starts. Then he came up and told his father and his mother, "I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." And then if you scroll down to verse 3, he doesn't listen to his parents' advice and counsel. He says, "Get her for me. She's right in my eyes." Scroll down to verse 7. He went down and talked with the woman. She was right in Samson's eyes. Whether this is a clear allusion to Genesis 6 or Genesis 3, what's in mind here is what Samson sees as good and what seems good to him. You're going to see that before we ever get to Delilah, Samson has already shown a large problem with sexual desire. He's controlled by his fleshly appetites. He's strong physically, but he's weak spiritually speaking. He's enslaved to his cravings and passions. So if you scroll down to Judges chapter, I say scroll like you have a computer open. I'm scrolling. Judges 15:1. After some days at the wheat harvest, Samson went to visit his wife with a young goat. If you don't know the story, Samson essentially lost his bride. Her father gave her to another man. Samson just thinks everything's cool and he can just go sleep with his wife when she's actually been given to another Philistine. And he said, "I will go into my wife now," right in the chamber. You're going to see a problem unfolds with this, and he finds out that his technically not father-in-law has given his to-be wife away. He's not happy about it. In Judges 16:1, this is the 3rd example. Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute. So not just a Philistine, just a normal citizen of Philistia, but here specifically a prostitute, and he just went into her. So there's no hesitancy. I want us to understand that Delilah is not the first mistake. Delilah's the final straw that finally breaks the back of this process of giving over to sexual sin and cravings and ignoring the law of God. Like, she's going to be the breaking point for Samson. But we don't even see Delilah until a few verses. Now, let's start to break this down. After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek. He just has a problem with women and controlling his passion, whose name was Delilah. Beautiful name, apart from the reputation of this woman. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her. Notice how the nation, those higher powers that be, are going to use Delilah and her sex appeal to essentially weaken Samson. And I'd like us to really consider, is that an actual strategy of the kingdom of darkness? Is that a tactic? Or is that just an isolated case here with Samson? Because I'm convinced, based on the last few episodes we've already gone through, that we're starting to see, no, this is a pattern. in human history and in the scriptures. So the lords of the Philistines come to her and say, seduce him. Like, we can't beat him. They've lost time and time again. He overpowers them. See where his great strength lies. So she, in her sexual seduction, playing on his fleshly cravings and passions, she's going to use that to expose his weak point. And by what means we may overpower him so that we can bind him to humble him. So I want us to think about this. Delilah is not the one to bind Samson, but rather the Philistines will bind him after seduction has taken played its role in this whole process and done what it does what it does to Samson. So Delilah is just the means to an end and a tool, just as very often in the hands of the kingdom of darkness, the demonic agenda behind sexual sin is to lead you into what will weaken you, destroy you, cause problems in your life, wreak havoc, sometimes blatant idolatry or occult practices. So her seduction is a means to expose and to exploit his weakness. So we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Don't know if that's a lot. Delilah said, like, there's no skip. Just, hey, Delilah says to Samson, tell me where your great strength lies. I want us to also consider how oblivious Samson is, or how ignorant, willfully, possibly, Samson is. Just how, like, not wise Samson is. Like, this should be a red flag. Tell me where your great strength lies, says a Philistine, and how you might be bound. Like, if that's not revealing, I don't know what is. I don't know how Samson would not catch this. How one might be able to subdue you. I would have been out by then. This date's over, I'm going to find me a better wife. But Samson, he's not in it for covenant or loyalty or honoring God. Just the temporary, fleeting moments of pleasure and satisfying his sexual appetites. And sometimes sex appeal blinds us to the real dangers and threats behind the scenes. The red flags that should be very obvious somehow just fade into the background and we miss them, or we choose not to admit that they're there because of how strong sex appeal is, how strong of a draw it is, and how magnetizing Delilah is. Samson said, well, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I'll be weak. The lords of the Philistines come up, bind him, he wakes up, breaks them off. That should have been a clear sign. Delilah's not someone I should hang out with. Delilah said to Samson, you've mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you can be bound. Second time, he tells another lie. Delilah calls the Philistines. He ends up breaking off the ropes. Third time, Delilah says, you know what? You keep telling me lies. Tell me how you can be bound. And he makes up something else. Well, if you weave my hair together. So, like 3 times, coincidentally, you wake up with that thing happening to you that you told Delilah would make you weak. Do you see how strong seduction can be, and sexual desire and pleasure? It just, sometimes it's like, yeah, I see the problems and the threats and the obvious danger, but I just don't care. And that's how sinister and deceptive and sometimes how subtle sexual sin really is. Philistines are upon you, who wakes up. This is the 4th time, and she finally breaks him. And she presses him so hard day after day that he goes, fine. If you cut my hair, I'll lose my strength. Okay? There you go. When Delilah saw that he finally told her the truth, he wakes up. This is what I really want to pay attention to. The lords of the Philistines came up. She made him sleep on her knees. He falls asleep on the knees of the assassin, pretty much, who's sent to kind of do the dirty work so that the Philistines can finish the job. Like, you set us up for the tea. And he's sleeping on the knees of one of the assassins. And she called a man, and he had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Did you see the lullaby effect that sexual sin, and all sin for that matter, can have? But specifically in this context, it's seduction, it's sex appeal, it's pleasure, like how it just rocks you to sleep, makes you unaware, so that you're just caught off guard and vulnerable. Kind of like all throughout the scriptures, we're told, be sober-minded, be awake, be vigilant. Well, there's something about sexual sin that can lull someone to sleep ever so subtly and gently, so that over time you fade into the kind of sleep that you don't even recognize that you're in. And you're turned off to the things of God. You're living in danger and constant threats and red flags everywhere, but you don't care, like Samson, sleeping on the knees of your metaphorical assassin because of the fact that, well, temporary sexual pleasure just means more to me than the longevity of my life and abundance and human flourishing and blessing people and living out my calling and honoring God. Like, those things take a backseat to my pleasures and cravings and passions. So then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. There's something about, like, she lulls him to sleep, then she torments him, and apparently the effect or the result is that his strength leaves. After that, what does it mean for her to torment him? I don't know. But the Philistines, do their thing, and Samson ends up losing his eyes. He's bound. Here's the thing, though. Samson was always bound. He was always bound. Just now it's very obvious to the world around him, and possibly more to himself. Like, maybe I've always been enslaved to my fleshly passions and my desire for pleasure. Maybe I just have been controlled by these things. And if Samson were to admit that, I would say, yeah, buddy, you really were. Samson's downfall didn't happen in one moment because of Delilah. Samson's downfall started in chapter 14, where you start to see these subtle compromises, and you're going, those don't seem to be like God-honoring decisions you're making. You're walking into what looks like will hurt you. And then after enough of those decisions to give himself over to his appetites and cravings, it finally culminates with Delilah. And she becomes the breaking point. And it's not that the text ever says there's any occult practices involved, sorcery, witchcraft. Maybe you can speculate that because she comes from the region of Philistia and they're known for those things as well with their pagan practices and idolatry, that maybe Samson could have been, a victim of such practices. We don't know. We can't say for sure. But considering where she comes from, it wouldn't be unreasonable to suggest that that was part of her agenda and the way she did what she did. But either way, notice how seduction becomes a step towards his demise and destruction in the end. God will still use him, but Samson's story is tragic. He's an example of what not to do. And don't let yourself be lulled to sleep by the small decisions to compromise all around you. And this becomes less about sexual sin in particular and more about just like generally don't compromise your values. But Exodus 32 is where we're almost done. But the golden calf story. Remember, Israel gets bored. Moses is taking too long. He's delayed. He's probably dead. Aaron, you're our guy now. Build us some new gods that take us out of Egypt. Right? One of the common themes between this story and the story of Samson is delusion. Israel's delusional, possibly intentionally delusional and consciously delusional, because they decide these golden calves that we literally just made, we're going to decide these are the gods that brought us out of Egypt, and not the obvious God that made himself known, the God of Abraham and our ancestors. Samson's very similar in that sense, where he's delusional. He ignores all the threats around him and the red flags, and I don't know why. I don't know how you can be so lullabied to sleep in that sense, that you don't see that, or he just doesn't care, or he's prideful and thinks I can break myself out again until he finally can't. But we see here, Exodus 32, I want to read the first 6 verses. When the people saw Moses delayed, which by the way, Moses never said when he'd come back down. He didn't know when he'd come back down. So they decided he's delaying, and they put a time frame on what he was supposed to be doing. And he delayed to come down from the mountain. The people gathered themselves, came to Aaron and said, hey, make us gods who will go before us. This Moses, we don't know what happened to him. So Aaron said, sure, take off the rings of gold in the ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters that Yahweh gave you as plunder when you came out of Egypt, and let's turn that into a god. They bring them to Aaron. He received the gold. He fashioned it. He made a golden calf. He ends up telling Moses, I threw it in this furnace. Well, it came out. What? And they said, these are your gods, O Israel. Delusion. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar. And I want you to pay attention. And said, tomorrow let's have a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early the next day. They offered burnt offerings, idolatry, blatant idolatry, brought peace offerings to a false god on a false altar, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Now, some have suggested that it's playing music, dancing, and we're going to see that there is an element of that. But this is more likely a kind of Hebrew idiom or figure of speech that refers to a kind of pagan orgy. Not just feasting, but, and we know, as we'll see in the last episode of this series, that blatant public sexual activity like that was very often associated with worship to the false gods of all the surrounding nations. So that wouldn't be unreasonable. But if you go down to verse 18 and 19, Joshua's like, I hear noise. There's noise of war in the camp, Moses. And Moses goes, it's not the sound of shouting for victory. It's the sound of singing. As soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. Hey, if you don't know me, my name is Jason, and you can find everything about this ministry on abovereproachministry.com. All of our Bible resources, our online church, ways to support this ministry, and so much more. And if you live anywhere near Spartanburg, South Carolina, come check out our church on Sundays at 10 a.m. Also, I have 2 brief updates for those of you that are part of this community. Number 1, the revision of my book Fruitful is coming out soon, hopefully in the next few weeks. So be sure to grab a copy of that when it does release. And number 2, we now have options on our website for monthly support. And when you become part of our monthly support team, you get access to all of our exclusive teachings and videos that get released every week. This is just my way of saying thank you. All right, that's all I got for you. Let's get back to the video. So here's something to consider. Exodus 32:25, just a few verses down. It says, when Moses saw the people had broken loose, right here, for Aaron had let them break loose to the derision of their enemies. In other words, in their own humiliation is in view here, as if they're running wild, they're out of control. This Hebrew idea of breaking loose can imply being uncovered, unrestrained, possibly involving nakedness. If you go back to the idea of them playing, it says they rose up to play. They're obviously not playing games, video games, and like playing dodgeball. So Genesis 26 verse 8 uses the same Hebrew verb, and it's used of Isaac sporting with Rebekah, which reveals to the king, I forget which king, that obviously they're married and that Isaac had lied about her not being his wife. And so clearly that action seems to indicate something that proves they were married, whatever that involved, okay? That concept of playing can involve actual sexual immoral behavior, letting loose. So there are just a few clues to piece together in terms of like what it is that Moses comes down to see. I don't think it is just, and again, I could be wrong, but I bring in this story because, well, Israel is known for copying the pagan ways of the surrounding nations and their occult practices, and things get worse throughout their history. So it isn't unreasonable to think that with the golden calf, with the blatant idolatry, with them deciding all the time throughout their wilderness wanderings, we want to go back to Egypt, that they would be imitating even those sexual practices. There's one more story I want to bring you to, and the reason I look at the golden calf, assuming that that's involved in their worship and sacrifices to the golden calf, it's interesting that those ideas go together. That at least in Genesis or Exodus 32, like when the Israelites were just set free, one of the first things they do is idolatry, which could involve and be wrapped with immorality and sexual perversion in that sense. Nakedness, uncovering. To what extent, I don't know. But some principles of wisdom to draw out from that story would be, hey, they're bored. They're waiting for Moses. So they busy themselves with the wrong things. David does something similar. He's supposed to be out fighting during the spring. He's on his roof, sees Bathsheba, and engages in adultery, murders Uriah, that kind of thing. And so one of the concepts that we can glean of biblical principles from this story is that, hey, busy yourself with the things of God, and you won't find yourself with much time to give to these destructive tendencies and habits of the flesh, including sexual perversion. In Matthew chapter 14, we have Herod's birthday. John the Baptist is about to be beheaded. And the daughter of Herodias, think about seduction. Think about what Delilah did with Samson. To get Samson, Samson's eyes got gouged out. Samson lost his strength. Samson told his enemies how to exploit his weakness. And how do you get to that point? Well, sexual sin inches you closer and closer. It's a slow fade until it's too late and you finally realize, I made my decision and I'm stuck with it now. Similar situation kind of here with John the Baptist being beheaded on Herod's birthday. So I think it's Herod has seized John for the sake of Herodias. It's not lawful, and though he wanted to put him to death, he feared him. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced. Now you can just make this out to be like an impressive act of athleticism and skill, or there's seduction involved likely, before the company, and she pleased Herod. Now you might think it's reading into it to think there's some kind of sensual nature to this and sexual appeal and seduction. I don't think so. But either way, he responds by saying, I'll give you whatever you want. Now that's quite the claim in the offer. Prompted by her mother, one of the reasons I think that there is seduction within this is because she's a puppet in the hands of her mom who wants to kill John. So on the other side of what seems to be seduction is death for the prophet. Except it's not for John's sin that he dies. It's through Herod's own, I don't know, what he sees in Herodias' daughter and what, pleases him. He gives himself over to that, and he's like, I'll give you whatever you want. Prompted by her mother, she said, give me the head of John. The king was sorry, but because everyone was listening, he beheaded John, gave it to the girl. She brought it to her mother. I think this girl right here is being used by her mom to exploit one of the king's weaknesses, which is lust, sensuality, sexual desire, and desire for pleasure, uses that to her own advantage and finds a way to kill John. And I think it's a very similar thing with Delilah and Samson. Philistines, use Delilah. We saw with Balaam. Balaam uses the Moabite women. Jezebel uses her seduction. Like, this is the age-old story. And it's on us to be considering, Am I tolerating any level of this in my own life and flirting with immorality instead of fleeing, like Paul says to do? So there's example after example of like, hey, be mindful of what you entertain. Be mindful of what you are watching and engaging in, and what games you're playing, and what you're allowing to come across your eyes, what you meditate on and fantasize about, and what you imagine as you're falling asleep, or when you look at that person wherever you're at, like whoever's in front of you. Be mindful of these things, because it really is like the culture wants to. It's the lullaby effect of using entertainment and music and shows and billboards and social media to I guess, dull your senses and desensitize people to the seriousness of sexual sin, so that we don't even realize we're entertaining lust anymore until like it's too late. So in the next video, we're going to jump into, I hope this was helpful just to think about these things from a different angle. In the next video, we're going to look at the forbidden woman of Proverbs. She's also known as the adulterous woman, and she's associated with occult practices and that which dishonors God. And then we're going to look at Rachel and Jacob. Rachel's one of Jacob's wives, the patriarch Jacob, and she has an interesting backstory. She's an interesting character. So we will dive into that in the next video. Hope to see you there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Hey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more biblical content just like this. We have hundreds of videos, but you might be most interested in these ones right here. Also, visit our website for all of our free resources and classes. And thank you so much for partnering with us financially to make this ministry even possible. Keep moving towards Jesus, and I'll see you in the next video.